Women locked up before and after again, and I have something pretty special for y'all today, or tonight actually, when I'm doing it. So anyway, I hope y'all enjoy this. It's a really good video. Please watch it to the end, because it's very concerning to do with women's rights and everything in prison. So I mean, it's really awesome video. I can pretty much say it's just as good as some of them other videos I got on there that's got a lot of views on them. It's really great, so please enjoy. Please watch to the end. It's a must-see. So thank you so much for watching my other videos also, and please stay tuned for other ones, and I'll see you after this. Thank you.
In 1996, Sonia Marcus was sentenced to a maximum of life in California prison.
I couldn't believe it. It did not compute. They're taking your life. I was 46 years old.
Her crime, possession of less than a gram of heroin.
Oh my God. How do you call yourself a judge in the interest of justice and look at somebody and tell somebody I'm going to take your life because you have an abuse problem against yourself?
18 years later, Sonia is out because Californians amended the state's notorious 3 strikes law.
This room right here is how much room I have between my bunk and my locker in the prison. That's why I never walked in there. You have the physical freedom, and after that much time, it's almost like a burden. You have no idea how to function because you've been locked in a box.
The U.S. incarceration system has swept up hundreds of thousands of women like Sonia. Many of them spend years locked up for nonviolent offenses. Women are the fastest growing population in the criminal justice system.
It's like a maze with a bunch of mice in it that are fed poison.
In this episode of Fault Lines, we go inside California's jails and prisons and ask what keeps so many women behind bars.
You just try and make it through each day the best way that you can.
We're heading to the largest women's prison in the world.
The Central California Women's Facility was designed to have 4 people in a room, and it now has 8 people in each room. There is no men's prison that has as many people in one cell.
This is the Central California Women's Facility, or CCWF. Cameras are rarely allowed in. Fault Lines has been given access to film here, but only what the prison authorities want us to see. 32 out of almost 3,500 prisoners at CCWF get to work in this program, building electric components.
And how long have you been?
I've been here since 2002.
I've been down 14 and a half years so far, so.
How old are you?
38.
How many days do you work a week?
I work 5 days a week, 8 hours a week.
In California, inmates have to pay for many basic supplies. Most prison jobs pay less than $1 an hour. The women here count themselves lucky. They earn minimum wage.
I don't have family out there on the street that support me. So for me, it's an advantage. My thing is I'm just trying to get out of here.
The prison had given us strict guidelines about what questions we could ask the inmates.
It's work, but it's educational, still training. It's like vocational training.
But the PR officer couldn't control what happened once we entered the main yard.
There's no water. People are dying. Mom!
When our cameras entered, the inmates were called back inside.
That's what she said!
Tension here is high. Last year, CCWF had to take in close to 1,000 more inmates when a nearby prison converted to a men's facility. It is now one of the most overcrowded prisons in the state. Tracy Jones was one of the women forced to move.
So they combined 2 prisons into one. And we were kicked out for male genders. So we're over here.
Many inmates told us off camera that the medical care was worse than before, and the conditions of their cells were appalling.
It's not just 15 minutes in that confinement. It's day after day, year after year, decade after decade. People cannot comprehend that.
And we've always known the entire time I was there, we always talked about if there was ever a fire or an emergency, how many of us would die, because you could not actually evacuate the place safely because of the population.
Over 2 years ago, a federal panel ruled that the California prison system was dangerously overcrowded. The state was ordered to reduce its prison population by at least 30,000 inmates.
They're horribly, horribly overcrowded, to the extent that people were literally dying in our prisons for simple medical conditions simply because they didn't get access to the medicines they needed or doctor's treatment.
The federal mandate was unprecedented and called the overcrowding a form of cruel and unusual punishment. California upheld the conversion of Valley State to a men's prison as one way to relieve overcrowding.
A lot of the reforms that they put pressure on and a lot of the changes are all around the men. Even relieving the overcrowding pushed the women into a more crowded situation. And
Misty Rojo spent 10 years in CCWF.
So the women get left behind because they can.
We're no longer housing inmates in gyms and day rooms and putting them in every nook and cranny in the prison, which has been the case before.
The reaction from state prison officials was consistent: denial.
There is no overcrowding at CCWF.
Is it normal to have 6 to 8 beds in a room?
Yes.
So why is it that so many of the prisoners came up to us and wanted to talk about overcrowding?
I can't answer that on their behalf, but I do know that we are not overcrowded.
I've been working with people around healthcare advocacy for approximately 20 years now, and the conditions are markedly worse. You have even more overcrowding. You actually have a reduction in the medical staff in the women's prisons.
I feel like if these conditions were as prevalent as some of the advocates or the inmates themselves try to portray, these are things that would have been seen and would have been reported in independent reports.
We will start seeing higher elevated levels of premature death because we know that incredibly densely crowding of people makes people die.
The road to California's prison crisis was paved by over 3 decades of the so-called war on drugs.
Taken as a whole, these proposals will toughen our laws against drug criminals.
During this time, the state passed some of the toughest sentencing measures in the entire country.
We all had to be horribly afraid that some horrific violent crime was going to occur. And the way to protect ourselves was through harsher and harsher penalties, sentences, more jails, more prisons, and just lock people up who don't look like us, who don't think like us, who don't talk like us, and just get them out of our neighborhoods and someplace where we will be safe from them.
The so-called war on drugs has come down to where the money comes from. Money has been poured into the enforcement of drug laws in communities of color.
In roughly 20 years, California built 21 new prisons, and the inmate population increased by 400%. Meanwhile, budgets for healthcare and education were slashed.
The prison construction sort of filled a void and a vacuum, both in terms of keeping the economy going just with the construction and the jobs, and then also, people who were unemployed because of the economy, who get caught up in crimes of poverty, you scoop them up, you figure out excuses to put them in those cages.
When you start having essentially a drain of all other basic services because you're over-incarcerating people, you've got a problem. And in California, we have a problem.
By 2010, California's prisons held close to 160,000 inmates, almost double the state's capacity. Governor Brown's response, something he called realignment, the transfer of low-level offenders to county jails.
That's the whole point of realignment. It's a shift of not only money, but actual activity. Probation will be handled up to a significant degree by judges and by probation departments and by district attorneys.
And so what criminal justice realignment set out to do was change the way that we sentence some of the lowest level, non-violent, non-serious offenses, so that people who would have previously gone to state prison for those offenses now will be dealt with at the county level by the county correctional justice systems.
Going into a typical jail cell here, this one holds 2 people. It's pretty tight in here. Not much privacy. There's about 80 of these in this unit, and there's a guard cell in the middle. We're not allowed to film that. None of the women on this floor are actually coming out of the cells, but the women downstairs are free to roam around, it looks like.
County jail is supposed to be under a 1-year sentence. Now, there's a person who might have been sentenced to 5 years or 10 years in state prison who serves that sentence in the county jail. And the county jails were not constructed or designed to hold people for that length of time.
One of the biggest things is there's no oversight at all. No one's really aware of who's in them, how many people, statewide, nobody knows.
I have so much to do when I get out. If I literally spent 2 months every day from 8 until 6 o'clock doing what I had to do, I'm still not going to be done because I've lost my house, I've lost my belongings. You know, for 7 months, just leaving everything, you lose things.
Right. What's the longest you've known people to stay in jail?
8 years fighting a case in a county jail.
I've heard of
Like
6 years.
I stayed
I've heard of 6 years.
12.
This group, called Fired Up, holds weekly meetings in the women's section of the San Francisco County Jail. On any given day, it may hold almost 200 women.
It's like, so what's going on out there that's bringing the same people back in? Oh, this person made it 2 weeks out. This person made it that. And I'm like, well, am I going to become a statistic? Am I going to leave here and then pop back?
In the last 3 decades, the U.S. female prison population has grown by about 800%, almost double the rate of men.
And it's sad. Before there was prison, there was jail. Before there was jail, there was juvenile hall, group homes. I've been through it all.
Low-level drug crimes swept in thousands of women. But alongside that were crimes linked to what some call the war on poverty.
If I don't, then they're going to put my daughter on the fast track to adoption.
So I've worked with numerous women who are doing 6 years in prison for stealing pantyhose to go to a job interview or stealing hot dogs to feed their kids. And that's what sucked up so many women into the system, and then their children are just lost to the wind, really.
Of the women who are in jails and in prison, 2/3 are there for nonviolent, non-serious offenses. Why, when it comes to women, are we over-incarcerating women, but also prosecuting and convicting women of really what amounts to low-level crimes?
Realignment was supposed to change that. Governor Brown boasted that counties could focus on rehabilitation rather than continuing to put people behind bars. And many believed women would be the first to benefit.
There's almost 1 million women under the correction system in the U.S. today. That includes women behind bars, as well as those on parole and probation. For many, their journey through the criminal justice system begins here at the county courts.
Michelle Tong is a San Francisco County public defender.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
She spent several months representing Elsie Hodge, who at one point faced 23 years in prison for a drug offense.
Possession count that Miss Hodge was convicted on.
Elsie's been in and out of jail and prison for the last decade of her life, all for minor drug-related crimes. This time, she was arrested for allegedly selling prescription pills.
When I asked, why did you let the buyer of these pills, supposedly, this white male in his 50s, go, and yet you you arrested Miss Hodge, who was actually around the corner. And he said it's to the officer's individual discretion and judgment.
It's almost like an harassment. Every time he sees me, he wants to bother me, and I don't have to be doing anything.
The justification's always been, she's a nuisance to the community. And in fact, the district attorney said that the Tenderloin neighborhood, San Francisco, doesn't need Miss Hodge on the street. I've seen people plead or get convicted of crimes of violence who are doing way less time than her.
Elsie's path to drug abuse is depressingly familiar to many inside women's jails and prisons. She'd been in an abusive relationship while struggling to support her 2 kids.
I've been raped. I had somebody threaten, the same person that raped me, threaten my kids if I tell. There's a lot of stuff I've been through that I don't even tell people because it's so much. I don't even want to remember it.
Under realignment, Elsie's sentence was to be carried out in the county jail. Since realignment took effect, some 30,000 offenders have entered the county systems.
I brought shame to my family and everything else, and I don't want my kids to be coming to see me incarcerated. I can't touch them, can't hold them, can't do nothing, and I have little kids.
The question that's not being asked is what happens to her children? What happens to those 2 kids who grow up without a mother?
My kids didn't really want to get to know me, which was really hard. I mean, I spent 10 years dreaming about getting home to them, and then to get home and be like, no, we don't even know you, lady.
We traditionally have taken families and separated them. They will sentence a person to a jail or prison that is, hundreds and hundreds of miles away, sometimes even in other states, without regard to the breakup of the family unit. And then there's surprise when the person gets out and they reoffend.
I'm not an active member of my children's lives, not by choice.
Ultimately, many argue realignment has done little to shift the underlying culture of punishment or its devastating impact on communities.
I don't have an address, so I go to the streets. I don't want to sleep on the ground, so I use. I'm not making excuses, but I use to stay up, and I stay up until I pass out, and I pass out. I don't make court dates. I don't make visiting dates. I don't visit my kids.
It completely destroys the family. It's completely destroyed mine, and I'm sure my children have suffered effects that maybe they can't even really talk about yet.
How's it affecting my kids? Well, my son can't read. My son is, he doesn't want to go to school. Oh, you can't even mention Tamika to him because Tamika who? And it hurts me. Oh yeah, it hurts me because it's just a cycle that continued.
Kimberly Jeffrey has spent almost 2 decades on the streets or behind bars for petty theft.
Oh, no, we're not gonna play that game. Ooh, now it really stinks.
During that time, she lost her children one by one.
When's his birthday? January 29. I went into Walgreens, and my son was crying. My infant son was crying, and I took a pacifier, took it out the package, and put it in his mouth so he could stop crying. And they arrested me, and I never saw that baby again.
The last time she was in prison, Kim went into labor with her son, Noel. It didn't go as she expected.
After the epidural and the anesthesia, Dr. Nasser, asked me or made a statement about the tubal ligation.
A tubal ligation procedure is a form of sterilization.
I freaked out. I'm like, are we doing what? I'm like, no, doctor, please do not give me any procedure outside of this C-section. I haven't agreed on anything else. So he brought in a form for me to sign declining the tubal ligation while I'm strapped down on the table, not in my right mind.
Kim's story is not unique. According to a recent report by the Center for Investigative Reporting,
come on, honey, let's go. I think this is probably the shortest way.
California women's prisons conducted at least 148 sterilizations between 2006 and 2010 without the state's approval, and possibly 100 more dating back to the 1990s.
It was just shocking to us that this was being done by medical professionals across the state through these people, one of the prisons being in Southern California, one of them being in the Central Valley.
A doctor cited in the report argued that sterilizing poor women would save the state welfare money in the future. He also said inmates were given a choice and not coerced.
And federal law is very clear that any entity that gets federal monies cannot sterilize people in prison for the purpose of birth control, period. It's a carte blanche ban.
You know, all they have to do is tell you that you have a condition that's life-threatening. You know, if you don't get sterilized within a week, you may die. And that's something that they would tell the inmates. You know, put that fear in them. So it's hard to know who to trust. It's scary. It's really scary.
So in that environment, it's too coercive to try to push or manipulate someone into consenting to sterilization, because then the consent can't actually be trusted.
Cynthia says prisoner advocates had been told in 2008 that sterilizations were taking place. That confirmation came from the federal receivership, the authority in charge of prison medical care in California. Did the receivership not know that it was illegal to do so?
The letter didn't ask whether or not procedures were illegal or not. It just asked if the procedures were taking place.
They're in a coercive environment, and the law clearly states no one is to be coerced or pressured into sterilization or tubal ligation.
That is absolutely why our regulations need to be followed. Our regulations are clear that a medically unnecessary procedure, such as a tubal ligation, is not to be performed. And when we were made aware that tubal ligations were being performed, we took immediate steps to ensure that these procedures needed to stop.
Repeat cesarean section. Oh, the patient declined to have tubal ligation. It says it right there.
Wow.
This is your report, I think, from your C-section.
Mm-hmm. Yes. This is from Dr.
January
Nelson.
29th.
Uh-huh.
Let's keep that aside.
To have a baby should be a wonderful, joyous experience, something that you just cherish all your life. And to me, it was a nightmare. I was humiliated. I was treated so badly. I just couldn't believe that I live in a society that treat people like animals. You know, I don't know if it's my situation because I'm incarcerated. I don't know if it's the complexion of my skin, but I couldn't believe it, you know, in this day and age, you know.
So it's not a shock, and it shows a deeper systemic problem, especially in terms of medical care and how people are seen in prison and how we're not even seen as people.
California legislators have called for an in-depth investigation into the sterilizations and other medical practices in prisons. But for people who know what life is like behind bars, promises of reform aren't going to make a real difference.
The system works so perfectly to its design, it can't even hold what it's creating. The system is set up to do exactly what it's doing, to break people and to keep them broken and to keep them coming back.
The federal government continues to pressure Governor Brown to reduce his prison population. Meanwhile, new jails and prisons are slated to be built around California.
It is true that imprisonment is this anchor of the economy in California, and so you can't, there's a sense, a political sense, that you can't just pull it out.
Because you have politicians in Sacramento who listen to law enforcement, who listen to the district attorneys, who listen to the police chiefs, who are afraid of being labeled soft on crime.
And while the political debate continues in Sacramento, thousands of people are cycled in and out of the criminal justice system every day. Today, it is Elsie. Michelle had won the case and Elsie was released.
Thank you. No, I'm like, it's so late. She probably asleep in the bed. Sleep. Thank you.
But Elsie has been here before. And she knows that the realities on the outside could lead her right back.
You wear a scarlet letter everywhere you go. When you go apply for jobs, they ask. So even though you've done your time and you've been told you're forgiven, you get out and you're still just another criminal to most people, and they don't even want to be bothered with you.
People are unwilling to really have conversations about whether or not we really need to use imprisonment that much at all, or is it really necessary? Could we find other ways to invest in communities and put the money into communities so people could really thrive?
Tomorrow you going to check in with SPR, okay?
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Unless you have that fundamental conversation, and this is going to involve completely revamping our laws, our penal system, we're not going to be able to solve this problem.
They tell you you're going to go and do some time and get out and go on with your life. That doesn't quite happen that way. I don't think you get through it whole. I don't think I'll ever be whole again to this day. There's funny things about me that are always going to be, for lack of a better word, f***ed up.
Hello, it's me again. Hope y'all enjoyed that video. I know I did. When I first watched it, I couldn't believe it, you know. Well, actually I could, because it happens all the time everywhere. Where I was at, it's just as bad as that place right there in California. I mean, it's that the people are fighting about their rights right now as we speak, everywhere. I mean, women get treated very, very badly in the prison systems. But that just goes to show you, you know. But I hope that everybody enjoyed that, and hope you continue to watch my videos, and please like, share, and subscribe, and thank you for watching. Peace and love, y'all. Bye.